Have you ever noticed that some people be able to achieve every goal that they set, while other people seem to not be able to achieve their goals no matter what they do, even if they're doing all of the quote unquote right things? Have you ever found yourself in that second group of people wishing you were in that first group of people? Well, I know I have, and that is what we're going to talk about today on the GymCrafter podcast. Welcome back to the GymCrafter podcast, everybody. My name is Tim. I am the head gym nerd here at gymcrafter.com, the website that I built to help ordinary folks like you and I build home and garage gyms that we absolutely love. And today I have got a topic that I genuinely love. I have spent a large portion of my life trying to set goals and achieve them. And at 53 years old, I've actually been able to do quite a few things that I wanted to do and have set out to do in my life. One of those things being GymCrafter. For those of you who haven't followed me for that long, I had a 30-year career in corporate retail and I was very, very successful. I had a very high-paying job and I decided to leave it all behind one day to sit in a garage and talk to a camera. And actually I quit at first to do the website, and then once the website failed, and we'll talk about that a little bit today, I moved to doing YouTube for a living, and I've been able to achieve a lot of my goals, not because I'm something special, but because I have worked with and for and had a bunch of people who have worked for me who are all extremely successful. And one of my superpowers is being able to look at what other people do that help them be successful and implement that into my life. And that's what I want to help you guys with today, because all of us, that's that time of year, right? This time of year, we always tend to go, okay, this time it's different. This year I'm going to lose the weight. This year I'm going to gain that muscle. This year I'm going to actually go to the gym. And then a month in, 2 months in, statistics show that 80% of us have failed on that goal already within like the first 1 to 2 months of us setting it. And what I want to talk about today is share some stories with you guys of people that I've worked with, people that I've trained, people that I've been friends with, people that I've worked for. I've worked for some very successful people who have all kind of found a way to always achieve the goals that they set. And it's not the stuff that you always hear. That's something that really struck me at one point as I realized these guys aren't out there doing all of the things that the self-help books tell you to do, all of the self-help podcasts tell you to do, right? So we're going to start this podcast by talking about 3 things that I did myself for a long time that I thought were going to help me hit my goals, that absolutely never helped me hit my goals. And oh, by the way, nobody that I ever have known that's been successful has done any of these 3 things, even though they sound really good on a podcast and they sound really good in a book. And the first among those things is setting SMART goals. Boy, if I heard one more trainer or online personality talk about setting SMART goals, I just want to puke a little bit in the back of my mouth, because I spent a long time believing in SMART goals. Every year I would sit down and for those of you who don't know what SMART goals are, you're not missing out on much, but I'm sure most of you have heard this, and this might be a surprise to a lot of you. SMART goals, SMART stands for specific, measurable, agreed to, realistic, and time-bound. There are 5 qualities of goals that your goals should be specific, your goals should be measured. And I'm not saying that those things are bad, but what I'm saying is that I've known a lot of people, myself included, who spent way too much time setting SMART goals and not enough time implementing things in our lives that actually helped us hit those goals. And the interesting thing is I could go up to several of the millionaires that I've worked for, and these folks are super successful. They have achieved every goal they've ever set out. And if I went up and I said, hey, Mike, did you set your SMART goals for 2025? He would look at me and go, what are you talking about? No, I didn't set any SMART goals for 2020. Now, his goals may have all of those components in it, but none of those folks ever sat down and went, is my goal specific? Is it measured? Like, that just isn't something successful people do on the whole. Now, there's a few of you out there, I'm sure, who this has worked for, but on the whole, I think people spend a lot of time or waste a lot of time on this SMART goal thing. So this is not one of the things we're going to talk about today. The second thing we're not going to talk about is we are not going to talk about the stuff that has been regurgitated over and over and over and over again in what I call shelf-help books. In other words, they're books where you read them and you're like, that sounds amazing. And you put it on your shelf and you never actually do anything with it. And the interesting thing is self-help authors, they can do a lot in a book to make things sound like they are just the miracle key to life, right? Like it just sounds so amazing. And then when you go out and try and do it, it just never works. And that's pretty much all of the self-help industry. I think I've read almost every self-help book out there at one point in my life, and turns out most of them don't actually do anything to help yourself. It actually requires you to go out into the world and do things and to stop reading books. And that's the trap that a lot of people get into, is they'll read a book and then they'll read another book and then they'll read another book. And look, I will actually absolutely recommend books here and there that I think are impactful. But for the most part, we're not going to talk about the 7 habits to highly successful people and beginning with the end in mind. And for those of you who've read those books, you know what I'm talking about. You know, they're, again, sound great on paper. The people that I worked with and the people that I know to be super successful, the weird thing is most of them never read these books. And I think that those books, a lot of times, they do more to hurt than to help. So we are not going to talk about any of the tips that are most of these famous self-help books are known for. And the third thing, and wow, am I guilty of this one? Oh my gosh, I can't tell you guys how many years I would sit down at the beginning of the year and I'd say, this year's going to be different. And I would get out my Google Calendar, or really back in the day, my Franklin Covey planner. And I would get out my highlighters and my different color pens, and I would write down all of my goals, and I would map them out into steps, and I'd put them on a calendar, and everything was color coded. And I'd spend literally 2 or 3 days doing this. And at the end of those 2 or 3 days, I would have this awesome looking, wonderful master plan. There are an awful lot of YouTubers out there who specialize in productivity. By the way, anybody who specializes in productivity who's like 22 years old doesn't know what the heck they're talking about. They haven't lived enough life to actually be productive yet. But I would have these wonderful looking plans, right? And it was just all tabbed and super organized. And man, I was ready to go. And literally within 3 to 5 weeks, those things would be unused, they would be unhelpful, they were just cluttered. Real life gets in the way of that stuff, right? Like that works great if you don't have somebody's birthday party to go to, or a family get together, or a vacation, or a pandemic, you know, or whatever happens to get in the way. Those specific highly detailed plans, again, something that sounds good on paper, just doesn't work well in real life. So those are the 3 things we're not going to talk about. And like I said, the reason we're not going to talk about them is because I know from personal experience, and I know from the folks that I worked with and trained and worked for, that those things don't work. And let me give you just a quick background on myself, just so that you guys know what I'm talking about, because I'm going to reference this a lot. I spent 30 years in corporate retail. The last 10 of those, I grew a division of a very large company from kind of high 8 figures to well into the 9 figures, a team of 30 people who were mediocre to a team of over 50 people who were amazing. And I did all that under the tutelage of some of the smartest, most successful business people that I've ever had the privilege to know or work with, some of the best entrepreneurs that will have ever been in history. I'm not kidding. And if you guys in Chicago know Apt Electronics, or ABT, the Apt family is who I worked for. And Mr. Robert Apt, he's no longer with us, but I had the privilege of working with him, and I feel like I earned 3 MBAs working next to this man. And boy, I tried to listen to him as much as possible. I'm going to give you guys some of his sage advice during this talk, but I can pretty much guarantee you that Robert Apt never sat down and wrote a SMART goal, never sat down and made a highlighted calendar. He was just extraordinarily effective. And a lot of what I learned is from him and his family and that business. So that's where it comes from. The people who worked for me, that team, I had salespeople who, you know, working with the same customers who earned $80,000 a year, and the same group of customers, this salesperson was making $250,000 a year. So I got to see firsthand what didn't work and what did work. So those are the types of things that I'm going to share with you. I don't share that stuff to brag on myself. Again, I left all that behind to talk to a camera in my garage, so how smart am I, right? But those are the people that I learned from. Those are the tactics. These are real world things that actually work, not to mention all of the people in fitness and the garage gym space that I have seen either not hit their goals or crush their goals. So these are real world things that really work. And we'll get into the 5 tips, and here's how I'm going to do that to try and stay structured and keep myself from rambling too much. Is I'm going to give you the tactic, what it is. I'm going to kind of define it for you. I'm going to give you a real life story of someone that I know who's used that tactic to succeed. And then I'm going to share with you guys throughout this what my personal fitness goals are for 2025, so that you can see how you can take your fitness goal and then use these tactics to help you hit those goals. And hopefully that will allow you to overlay your goals onto the system and allow you to hit whatever goals you've set for this year. So let's dig in. And this first one sucks. It's just going to be real honest with you. This is one of the hardest ones to get your head around, but I promise you, this is something that the most successful people in the world all do, and the least successful people in the world resist with all their might, and that is this concept. Everything is your fault. And that might sound a little harsh, and I'll rephrase it to sound a little bit less harsh. Everything is your responsibility. If you don't want to take, it's not your fault that so-and-so did such and such to you, that's fine. But regardless of where your problems come from, regardless of where your obstacles and challenges come from, they are all your responsibility. In this world, we are surrounded by people who spend their entire life talking about how disadvantaged they are, how oppressed they are by other people, how they were born into a bad situation, how they suffer from this that you don't suffer from, and they had this situation that you didn't have, and you must be nice to be you because you didn't have to go through what. Look, guys, we all have our stuff. Regardless of how bad you think you have it, there's other people who had it worse than you and found a way to succeed in life. And the first step to that is just taking responsibility for everything in your life and to not spend one more second worrying about that something is somebody else's fault. If you haven't followed the podcast, I suffer from some chronic problems health-wise. I have a headache disorder that while lifting weights really helped it, I still get regular headaches that last for days. Nothing helps them, nothing fixes them. It's not migraines where I could take medication. So it's just a thing that I live with, right? It sucks. And there was a large portion of my life where I just sat on the couch. I'm like, well, this sucks. I'm just going to lay on the couch. I'm just going to smoke a lot of pot. I'm just going to numb myself. I'm going to take whatever medicine they give me to make the pain try and go away. And I'm just going to, basically flush my life down the toilet. It's not a matter of sitting around like I used to and going, poor me. Boy, you guys don't know. Well, you don't understand what it's like to have a headache for 4.5 years. It doesn't go away. I could easily say that to a lot of people, but you just don't understand what it's like. You just don't get it, right? Like, I've had it so bad. It doesn't matter. Everybody's had it bad. So for me, I have to approach my fitness goals and my life and how I approach life. And by the way, this is one of the reasons why I'm talking to a camera in a garage and that I had to go, hey, you know what? It's my responsibility to try and fix this problem. And part of that fix is quitting a really high-paying job that I was very good at, that a lot of people thought, my parents still think I'm absolutely crazy for doing that. But it's my issue to fix. And so as I develop my training and as I look at my training for this upcoming year, I've got to design my training around addressing the headache. So as you guys are looking at your 2025 fitness goals, you want to ask yourself, am I making excuses or am I getting results? Because you can't do both, right? You can either have excuses or you can have results. So anytime you find yourself saying, well, I would do that, but this and this and this. Look, whatever the this and this and this is, the better job you can do of taking ownership of those things, then do that. And like I said, I know there's not a lot of great self-help books out there, but there is one. If you have trouble with this, there's a book by a guy named Jocko Willink called Extreme Ownership. I can't recommend this highly enough. It addresses this specific issue directly. So if this issue challenges you, this book will help you. So there's the first one. Taking ownership and really just accepting the fact that everything is your fault. Let's move on to the second one. And the second one is a lot more fun than the first one, and it's a lot easier to do, and it makes a lot more sense to a lot of people, and that is start with your why. And I think the first episode of this podcast was about building your home and garage gym. You have to start with why you're building a gym. Well, the same is true of hitting your fitness goals or your life goals. You have to have a why that is worthwhile. And I want to share with you the story of a very good friend of mine who worked where I worked and was a mediocre salesperson and mediocre or worse health, right? Overweight, not strong, always sick, didn't do really well, was always, those guys there, those girls that you work with where they're always almost fired, like they do just enough to not get fired. And it's not because they're doing it on purpose, it's just they're never really motivated. They call off a lot. They're late. They only kind of put half effort in. They just get the job done, but that's it. And maybe that's you. I know that's been me at certain times in my life for sure. Well, this particular guy, all of a sudden over the course of a year, went from one of the worst salespeople in the building to one of the top salespeople in the building, quadrupled his income, absolutely just crushed it work-wise. In that same year to 2 years, he went from overweight, out of shape, always sick, to low body fat percentage, super capable, super athletic, started playing a lot of basketball, really worked out, hit the gym regularly. And a lot of people looked at him and went, man, how did you because those people that you kind of just know at work, but you don't see them a lot, and then all of a sudden you look over and you're like, wait a minute, you're way different than you used to be. Well, that's what happened to him. So a lot of people would ask him, and what happened was his why changed. He went from a young guy to a married guy with a kid. And that made all the difference in the world. And I'm sure some of you know people like that. Some of you may be people like that. You're a different person before you're married with kids than after you're married with kids. Your why change. That's the only thing that changes, guys, is your why. Is you have a reason to do things. Beforehand, it was like, well, I'm working to earn some money to go out at night, and I've already got a girlfriend, I don't really care how I look, and there's lots of just reasons to be mediocre, because you don't have a really good, it's like, well, why should I work hard? Well, why should I try and make as many sales as I can? Well, why should I go to the gym every day? And then all of a sudden, when you're married and you have a little kid looking at you, and that little kid is not only going to look up to you as their father or their mother, but they're going to look to you for providing everything that they need, and you're the one that they rely on, right? All of a sudden, that why is so, so powerful. So finding your why, and that guy, man, I'll tell you, he's killing it to this day. He's one of my favorite people in the world, and I love seeing his success, and his success, like I said, strictly came from his why. So how do you do that for people who don't, well, I'm not married and I don't have a kid? Well, you have to find the why. So one of the ways that you do that, there was a guy who helped Toyota turn around. There was a time when Toyota actually didn't make the best cars in the world, and now they make some of the best cars in the world. And the reason that they did that is in large part, and I don't know the guy's name, but he instituted what he called the 5 why process. And what the 5 why process is, and I'm not going to recommend a book for this one, although there is a book called Start With Why. It's an okay book. If you read the first 5 pages, you'll get the point. But this gentleman came in and he said, why do we want to make better cars? And they said, well, we want to make more money. Well, why do you want to make more money? And the idea was, if you got to ask yourself 5 times. So for fitness, how this relates, a lot of people are like, okay, why are you working out? I want to lose weight. Why do you want to lose weight? That's the second why, right? Well, I want to lose weight because I'm kind of sick and I don't feel good and my doctor told me to. Okay, well, why do you not want to be sick? That's the third why. Well, it's keeping me from going to work. I'm in trouble because I call off, or, it's keeping me from being a good dad or a good mom, or it's keeping me from I used to be able to go play soccer all the time and now I can't do that. Okay, why do you want to go play soccer all the time? And if you ask yourself about 5 times, what you'll find is that you will get to the actual why that is as motivating as my friend getting married and having a kid. Because that's an actual deep, it's not a surface level why. What I found being in fitness as long as I have is one of the worst whys for most people is I want to get jacked and strong, right? Now, a lot of people, that's kind of why they work out, but I guarantee you, if you were to do that 5 why process with those people, they're doing it for other reasons that are a lot deeper than I just want to get jacked and strong. As you're looking at your fitness goals and as you're looking at your health goals, really try and think about a why that's going to be stronger and more motivating than the things that are going to try and pull you away from that why. You have to have a why that's more meaningful to you than deep dish pizza. That's a problem that I had. So I live here near Chicago. Lou Malnati's stuffed sausage pizza. I can literally eat as much as you put on the table in front of me, and I have to have a why that is more meaningful to me than the level of deliciousness of that pizza. So that's how meaningful that why has to be. But think about that for 2025. That's a really important thing. And what you do is when you combine number 1, taking ownership of everything in your life and combining it with a why that you really care about, all of a sudden you're starting to see why the people that always hit their goals actually hit all their goals. And let's look at the third one and see how that plays in. And for this one, I need to share a story that happened very recently. Someone that I was training came to me, and there's a gentleman named Gary Brecka. And I would recommend for anybody who knows about Gary Brecka that you never ever listen to anything that Gary Brecka has to say. Gary Brecka is an absolute idiot who likes to say things that sound smart but aren't actually smart at all. And so he was on Joe Rogan, and gosh, you know, boy, if they're on Joe Rogan, you got to believe them. And look, I love listening to that show, but you got to take those guests with a grain of salt. They don't always know what they're talking about. So Gary's a good example of that. So he went on this long tirade about you can only buy a certain kind of bread because of a certain type of niacin that's in this type of a bread, and the niacin that's in the other type of bread has cyanide in it. And boy, if you're eating this, all this other bread, then it's gonna. And I had this person come to me so worried about what the best type of niacin in bread was that they were eating. Now, that person, when you start asking them questions, guess what else they're concerned about? They're concerned about what the ratio of carbs to fat in their daily intake is. They're concerned about within 15 minutes, what time of day should they eat their carbs and when should they not eat their carbs. They're looking at, well, shouldn't my curls be at a 30-degree angle versus a 35-degree angle? Well, shouldn't my feet be pronated out this much? And I'll tell you what, as a certified trainer, I can appreciate that all those things on paper make a difference. The problem is the difference they make is minuscule, right? It's tiny compared to the bigger thing. So when you start asking this person to say, okay, great, let's forget about the bread, forget about the angle of your arm, forget about all that stuff. How much sleep did you get last night? Oh, well, you know, they have this new thing on Netflix and I was up with my wife until about 1 o'clock. All right, back, I don't care, punt everything else, focus on the big rocks that actually matter. If you aren't getting your sleep right, if you aren't getting your basic nutrition right, if you aren't getting some very basic big rocks right, none of the other minutia matters. The other thing is you can get the big things right and be very effective with your time and be very efficient. It takes a lot of time to spend all day in the bread aisle at the grocery store looking at the label for what type of niacin is in the bread. Right? It's insane. It's absolutely insane. I had a big problem with this. I used to listen to a guy named Peter Attia, who I love. I used to listen to the Andrew Huberman podcast, who I love. Not knocking those guys at all. I used to listen to a ton of the Joe Rogan stuff. And I had to unsubscribe from all of that because I found myself so buried in the minutia of all this stuff. And here's why that minutia is out there. Because nobody's going to tune into a podcast that says, hey, make sure you get 8 hours of sleep and eat good food. Right? Okay, well, that took what, like 10 seconds? Where's the rest of the podcast that I have to post every day, week after week after week after? Like you end up talking about junk. So just to have the content, and I really try not to do that on this channel, but man, it's easy to get, it's called majoring in the minors. It's easy to major in the minors. So the way that I look at this, and this is a book, and again, a book recommendation out of all those self-help books that I've read, this is one that I read once a year. It's called The One Thing. It's by a guy named Gary Keller. Here's the crux of the book. I still recommend you read it, but the crux of the book is find the one thing in each area of your life that by doing it makes everything else either easier or unnecessary. And when you're looking at fitness, there's some very core things like sleep that are these big rocks that make everything else easier or unnecessary. Look, if you get the right amount of sleep and you stay away from fast food, you can have whatever kind of bread you want from the grocery store. It doesn't matter what kind of niacin or vitamin B or whatever else Gary Brecka was talking about in that bread. It's really, really important to get the big things right. So take a step back when you look at your 2025 goals and say, hey, what are the few big rocks I need to get right? And when I look at my goals for 2025, I'm looking at 3 things, right? Number 1, I am looking at absolutely hard and fast. I am getting 8 hours of sleep a night, period, end of story. It's the only way in my 50s that I'll make any gains in the gym, make any advancements to my fitness goals. Everything else goes out the window if I don't get enough sleep. So that's one of my big things. Number 2 is this year I'm not going to eat any fast food. I have a weakness for pizza and McDonald's French fries and double Whoppers with cheese, and I love all that stuff. I really just need to focus on eating whole foods from the grocery store and cooking my own meals. So if I can stay away from the fast food, I'm good, right? Like for me, that's a big rock for me. Just that one thing, just cook all of my own meals. And the last one I mentioned in a previous podcast, but I'll mention it again, is I'm getting a certification called the Pain-Free Performance Certification. And if I am going to hit the fitness goals that I've set for myself, not only this year, but going forward, I absolutely cannot get injured. So as you look at your goals for 2025, take it from the people who have been successful and focus on just the things that matter. And for most of you, I'm gonna give you a big one right now. Most of you taking supplements can take 90 to 95% of those supplements and throw them in the garbage and never buy them again. They're not doing you anything at all. I don't care what the label says. I don't care what Gary Brecka said on a podcast. I don't care what Joe Rogan says. I don't care what the Bulletproof guy, another guy who you should never listen to. Never, ever, 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 ever listen to the Bulletproof Fitness guy. He actually wrote in his longevity book that heroin was a viable longevity drug. So take that for what it's worth and apply that level of, oh my God, really, to everything else he says. He also injects his own urine into his muscles. So that's a thing. So anyway, so don't major in the minors, major in the majors, and you can get a lot done this year. And that brings us to the next one, which I see most successful people have in common, which is a concept called desired outcome. You have to look at things in life as what is your desired outcome? And is what you're doing now moving you closer to or further away from your desired outcome? Now, on the face, that sounds very simple. I'm going to use an example for all of you in relationships. When you get into an argument, well, the goal is to not argue, right? The goal is to make up and to have all the good things that goes along with making up with your significant other after you argue. But what do you both find yourselves doing? You do a lot of things that move you further away. You're doing a lot of things that are moving you away from getting along instead of moving you towards getting along. The problem is the things that move you towards the desired outcome sometimes aren't the most fun things. Same thing with, I want to lose weight. Great. Well, is driving through Burger King and getting a double Whopper with cheese moving me closer to or further away from my desired outcome of losing weight? That's an easy one to answer, right? But if you start thinking about and looking through that lens and thinking about your fitness and your training and your life through this particular just kind of paradigm of looking at things in life, what you'll find is that a lot of the things that you just do subconsciously, you realize are actually moving you further and further and further away from your desired outcome. Some of the stuff we think is good for us for fitness is not helping us. I'll give you a couple examples. Cardio is the single worst way to lose weight. Cardio is important. Cardio is critical for exercising your heart. Cardio is something you should do on a regular basis. Cardio is not the thing you should do to lose weight. Cardio is actually moving you further away from your goal of losing weight. If cardio helped you lose weight, then everybody would be able to lose weight because that's everybody's first approach is I'm just going to go run for hours on the treadmill and lose weight. That never works. It just doesn't work. It's provably false. But people think they're doing it because they think it's the right thing to do. You're actually moving yourself further away from your desired outcome. So when I talk to people about how to lose weight and we start talking about resistance training, and I say, well, what if the 300 calories you burnt in the last hour on the treadmill, I could just have you burning without doing anything different just because you have more muscle on your body and your body just has a higher metabolism rate and you can burn those calories without having to run on a treadmill. And oh, by the way, your body's not going to adapt to that like it is running on a treadmill because eventually what happens, for those of you who like to do a lot of cardio, is that cardio stops making you lose weight and now you have to do more cardio and now you have to reduce your calories further. And you end up in this spot where you're eating an amount of calories that's unsustainable. You're just hungry all the time and you're doing an unsustainable amount of cardio and you found yourself at another plateau where you're still not losing weight. Well, that's because what you're doing isn't moving you closer to, it's moving you further away from your desired outcome. So that's a good example, fitness-wise, of the desired outcome principle when you apply it to your goals. And I had to make a hard decision this year, and I have such a hard head. I like what I like, and I want to do it no matter what, and I am really good at convincing myself that it's actually moving me closer to my desired outcome, when in reality it's moving me further away from my desired outcome. And those two things are barbell back squats and barbell deadlifts from the floor. I enjoy barbell training. I enjoy those two movements. I'm good at those two movements. I can't squat a ton, and I'm not the heaviest deadlifter in the world, but I'm good at the movements and I enjoy doing them. The problem is that the way that my back is and the way that my body is at this point, I cannot barbell back squat heavy anymore. I just can't. I've moved to a leg press, and as soon as my new rack comes in, we're going to a belt squat. And look, I can train my legs that way. That's a great alternative. But barbell back squats, if I'm looking at training pain-free for the whole year and staying not injured, I have to not barbell back squat anymore. Now, I'm still gonna put a bar on my back and squat for range of motion and technique. I'm just not gonna load it real heavy. So I have to get rid of that. Same thing with deadlifts. If you watch the Instagram or you watch the YouTube shorts that I put up, you'll notice most of my deadlift videos now, I'm deadlifting from a raised platform, or I'll do like rack pulls. And the reason for that is at 6'6", I'm just not in a position to deadlift from the floor and not risk hurting my lower back, at least not at this point. So I might earn that again at some point, but I had to just go, you know what? You're just not doing it from the floor anymore, Tim. We're just not going to do it. So for me, those two things, which I thought were moving me closer to my desired outcome of being stronger, were actually moving me further away because they were causing pain and injury that would keep me from being in the gym or keep me from being able to push in the gym like I need to achieve results at my age. So for my training, that's how that applies. So take a look at what you're doing for your fitness goals and what you're doing in your training, and really be honest with yourself and ask yourself, are those things moving me closer to or further away from my desired outcome? And oh, by the way, your desired outcome happens to be that why that we were talking about, right? So that kind of how this stuff kind of ties together, and you're starting to see how all of these things, their habits and their strategies, that the most successful people in the world, they do all of these. They don't just do one of them, they do all of them. And that's going to bring us to the last one, which was an absolute game changer for me in my life in all areas. And that concept is understanding the difference between inputs and outputs, and the fact that you cannot manage or affect an output. You can only manage or affect an input. And here's what I mean for that. I dated a girl for 4+ years whose dream was to be a writer. That's what she wanted. That's what she went to school for. She got a double major in English lit and something else that had to do with poetry, I think. And she wanted to be a writer, but she never wrote. She never wrote. She never wrote. She never sat down and wrote, hardly at all. She would write when she felt like writing, which was almost never. So she would always get mad at me and say, if you want to be a writer, why aren't you writing? Like, you can't just sit and wish to be a writer. Being a writer is the output, right? Being a writer is the result. It's the thing that happens from doing the things that are inputs. And the inputs are writing. Stephen King wrote a great book called On Writing. And that was basically the crux of this book. Is every day Stephen King would go in, and regardless, every day he wrote for a certain number of hours, period. He goes, I don't care if I went in there and I stared at a blank piece of paper for 2 hours. I was in there and I was trying to write every single day. You can't just sit and go, I want to be a writer. Stephen King didn't become the popular writer. Now, we can argue whether or not he's a good writer or not. I probably won't have a real popular opinion there. But you can't argue with the fact that he's a successful writer. And that success came in large part from him doing the input of writing every single day. You want to be a singer, you have to sing. I've got a niece who wanted to be a guitar player, but she never played guitar. I've got another niece who wanted to be a drummer, but she never practiced the drums, right? Like, you can look and go, I want to do this thing. I want to lose weight. I want to get stronger. I want to get six-pack. I want to, whatever your fitness goal is. But if you don't do the things that get you there, you're never going to get there. But there's one step further that you have to look at this. When you're looking at your goals, and this is why I talked about, we're not going to talk about SMART goals, because SMART goals are all focusing on the output. I'm going to lose X amount of pounds by May 2nd, and it's great. That's an output. That's a terrible goal. Your goals should not be your output. Your goals should be your inputs. And those have nothing to do with being smart. Those have to do with, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write for 2 hours every day from 7 to 9 a.m. And if you happen to end up being a writer, that's great, but the writer part can't be your goal. And it's the same thing with nutrition. My goal isn't to eat a certain mix of carbs and fat and fiber and whatnot. I have in my app, I track that stuff. But my goal is the input of not driving through a drive-through again this year, and to only cook my meals. That's the input, right? I know that if I do that input, the output will take care of itself. So when I look at helping people achieve their goals, too often we sit down and at the beginning of the year, like, I want to have this output. I want to be able to fit into this dress for my wedding. I want to be able to fit into this bikini for my vacation. I want to be able to look a certain way so I can take my shirt off at the pool when June rolls around, right? Well, those are outputs. What are the inputs that are going to get you to those outputs? And so I want to share with you guys one that I was really probably not going to share, and I still hesitate to share this with you, but one of my outputs is I want to be able to dunk a basketball. And I am a 6'6", and embarrassingly enough, I've never been able to dunk. I have a vertical jump of about 1.6 inches. And this is part of a bigger kind of overall plan that I've got this year called Operation Calvin, just to tell you. So when we talked about finding your why, my why, and I don't think I shared it back then, we talked about it, so I'll share it right now. My why right now is I've got a little nephew who's 5 years old named Calvin. Now, I don't have my own kids I'm going to be 54 in January. Probably not going to have my own kids at this point, unfortunately, but that is what it is. Again, everything's my fault, my responsibility, right? I can't get mad and blame that. So what I am going to do is I'm going to be the cool uncle to Calvin. And Calvin is going to play sports. 100% guaranteed Calvin's going to play a sport or three no matter what. And my goal as a cool, fun Uncle Tim is I want to be able to play whatever sport. If he decides he wants to play football, I want to be able to not only run a route that he can throw a football to me, I want to be able to throw the football far enough to where he can actually run an actual route and have me throw it to him. If he decides he's going to play basketball, I want to be able to play basketball. I want to be, because I'm going to be in my mid-60s when he's a teenager, I want to be able to hang with him on the basketball court. I want to be able to play with him. I want to be able to spend time with him. I don't want to be that older relative who sits on the porch and goes, "Oh, Calvin, you're great, man. That's a good throw." I want to be out there. I want to be out there doing whatever he's doing. If he decides to play soccer, the world's most horrible sport, sorry guys, I don't like soccer, I want to be able to do that, right? I want to be able to run up and down and not score any points and just basically do cross country with a ball. Sorry, I couldn't help myself, guys. But anyway, you guys get the idea. So part of that is I want to be able to dunk a basketball. I think it would be cool in my 50s and hopefully running even further than that to be able to dunk. At 6'6", I've got an advantage, right? I don't have to develop a 48-inch vertical, but I have to have more than a 1.6-inch vertical. But my goal can't be to dunk. So I sat down and I said, okay, I want that possibility to happen. And look guys, it may or may not. Here's another reason why this is so important. When you set an output goal and then you don't hit it, there's a disappointment there, right? Like if I end up not being able to dunk and my goal was to be able to dunk, then I'm going to be disappointed. I'm like, oh man, I didn't hit my goal. I didn't do what I wanted to do. So my goals have to be the things that will allow me to increase my vertical as much as possible. And if that ends up as a result of dunking, that's great. But what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be doing the knees over toes guy training this year. You saw on the gym tour that I posted on the last episode, all the stuff that I have in the gym specifically for that training. And oh, by the way, just so that you guys know, I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen this, that training sucks. It's uncomfortable. It's painful. It's difficult. Like it's effective, but man, is it not enjoyable. It's going to take a lot of self-control for me to stick with that. But that's my goal, is to follow that programming. There's some guys that coach jumping specifically, and there's also a base of strength I'm going to need first. There's going to need to be some work on my ligaments and tendons, especially my Achilles. A lot of guys who, when they get in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and they decide to pursue an athletic endeavor, the first thing they do is they pop their Achilles because they haven't strengthened those connective tissues. So there's this whole series of things I have to do to get to maybe the output of dunking a basketball. So, but my goals are the inputs. My goals are, I'm going to start with a strength block and I'm going to get as strong as I can. And then I'm also going to do some gymnastic style warm-up training, which is good for developing strength in your ligaments and your tendons and your overall flexibility. And then I'm going to move into the knees over toes stuff. And then I'm going to move into the specific jump related. So those are my input goals to get to this hopeful output. So how that relates to you guys is as you look at your 2025 and beyond, and I recommend that you guys look at long-term progress, not just what I'm going to do in the next 12 weeks. I'm going to get in shape in the next 12 weeks and then I'm done. You're never going to be done, right? So, but look at what are the inputs that are going to get you. So if you sit down and go, I want to lose weight, that's a bad goal. Yep, I just said that. Losing weight's a bad goal. Gaining strength's a bad goal. Having a six-pack's a bad goal. What's a good goal are the behaviors that will get you those things. So as you look at your goals, think to yourself, is that an output goal or an input goal? And you can apply this to your entire life. I think you guys get the point. Hopefully you get the point. Hopefully I've been clear. And those are the 5 kind of core things that all of the successful people that I've ever known, whether they've worked for me, whether they've worked with me, whether they've taught me or mentored me, whether I've just happened to have the privilege of working with them, all of the successful people I know do all of those 5 things. And they do all of them. They don't just do 3 of them, they do all of them. And what they don't do is they don't sit down and read a lot of self-help books. They don't sit down and write SMART goals, and they don't sit down and write out pretty calendars, and they don't spend 4 days making a Google calendar that they're not going to follow. They spend their time actually executing and ingraining these habits. And like that first one, taking responsibility, some of them are hard, but I promise you that if you do all of them, that you have a better than average chance of hitting your goals in 2025. And that's all I've got for this episode of the podcast. As usual, I appreciate you guys hanging with me. I appreciate you listening to me ramble for this long. Hopefully this episode was helpful. If it was, make sure you hit that like button, make sure you're subscribed, and leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. Let me know if any of those things work for you, if they don't work for you, some other tips that'll help other people. Hopefully they can look down and get some help. And I really hope that all of you hit your goals in 2025. I will be here for the entire year, talking to the camera in my garage. And until the next video, I'm Tim with GymCrafter.